You've been studying Japanese for a while, but no matter how much effort you put in and how much new information you learn, you just feel like you make no progress. You're in the Great Japanese Plateau. The information is vast and there are almost infinite paths to take. So you set a goal, a clear destination with a clear path, which you would think would be enough. But what if you're taking all the right steps and you still see that nothing is working? The truth is that the problem cannot be what you think it is. In this video, I'll explain how to identify invisible problems that are holding you back and give you a thought experiment that will help to simplify the process to see them more clearly. But how do I know that it actually works? I've been living in Japan for the past 10 years. I graduated from language school and Japanese college and worked in Japanese companies using Japanese for business. It worked for me and it can work for you too. Now, earlier I mentioned invisible problems, and I realized you might be wondering what I meant by that. It will probably help most to illustrate this with an example from my life. I remember when I was in language school in the very beginning, I was all in for studying Japanese. It had me super excited. I was making rapid progress, learning new stuff every day, and so excited to use the language and explore. But in the middle of my studies, I had to go home for 3 months. When I came back to study in language school for the second time, things were completely different. I had just gotten a new student visa and entered the country to study hard again, but I quickly noticed that things became less clear. I knew that I wanted to continue down a path in Japan, but as I started to focus on what's next after language school, it became way more muddy. I didn't have a bachelor's degree, making it harder to get a visa in Japan, and that made me close my mind to some of the options that I might have otherwise had. And as a result, I lost a lot of motivation and direction. It started to feel like, what's the point? I even started failing in class because I had lost all purpose in Japan. All I could really consider was one option, which was to go back to school for a bachelor's degree. But I also knew that I really didn't want to do that. The thought of spending 4 more years in school was enough to make me go crazy. But there weren't many options. So as I went to class each day, eventually I began to notice some posters on the wall in my language school. And one of them was of a building that I had seen in anime and Japanese dramas. And it said something like this on the poster: "Do you want to stay in Japan and become a game designer for Sony or Nintendo?" It was an ad for a CG design school, and it was written that the language school could support you in your application to the school. And even though I didn't want to go back to school, I decided to go check out the open house because it sounded pretty interesting, and I've always been interested in games. I went up to the elevator to, I think it was like the 67th floor or something like that, and as I came out and began to walk around the halls, I saw names on the doors that said like Nintendo and Sony, etc. And the names of teachers that were listed to have worked on projects such as Final Fantasy 12, 13, Bloodborne, Monster Hunter, all these crazy games. It was insane. And to top it off, the whole building was blasting Porter Robinson, which was getting pretty popular at the time. I think it was the song Shelter, which was going kind of crazy then. But all of this did something crazy to reignite some sort of spark in me. I had always been a gamer, and Japanese games were one of the biggest influences on introducing me to Japan. And now I knew what I was aiming for. Having this invisible pull put me on a trajectory towards the place I wanted to go. Like a magnet pulling metal, though you can't see the force, the connection was there. Now, that's a bit of a long story, but this invisible force that was pulling me in a new direction is a force that is either helping you or hurting you. The invisible force can be a goal that orients you and gives you motivation, but it can also work in the opposite way, more like a barrier to block your way. And I say invisible because most people are very bad at identifying it on their own, and as a result, they never progress. But the invisible force is really just an unidentified constraint. Now, it actually doesn't really relate to Japanese at all, but rather this is just an aspect of the act of learning. The thing is though, that it will very heavily impact your progress in Japanese if you don't identify it first. I've been teaching people language for over 10 years, and one thing that I can say for sure is that students do not progress if unidentified constraints are present. Now, I want you to picture for a second a stream of water flowing downhill. Imagine the specifics of Japanese as a pond down at the bottom of the hill, and the water is basically your consciousness. If you hit the pond at the bottom, logically, you would enter into the specifics and be able to absorb them. The problem is that dirt and rocks and branches pile up in the way and throw water out over the sides, never reaching the pond below. And there are most likely things that are preventing your consciousness from entering into the specifics of Japanese. Now, I realize that may sound a bit abstract and a little bit strange, but the main point of all of this is that understanding flows from the top and there are blockers on the way down. These are the order of constraints. Higher level constraints prevent progress in all fields. So it is your job to identify what is keeping you from learning. This is really the skill of a teacher rather than a student. But if you can master this skill, you'll be able to effectively teach yourself anything. If it's still a bit confusing, let me give you a clear example. One of the biggest constraints I see in my students, especially younger ones, though it happens with all ages, is the constraint of focus. Way too often, people lose focus long before the instruction even finishes. Imagine a class where the teacher is explaining and the student raises their hand to ask a question while the teacher is explaining. The teacher had written everything out beforehand, putting hours of work into finding the best way to explain everything step by step, but you start to worry about step 35 when you're only on step 2. If you don't follow step 2, you're never going to reach it to 35 anyways. So while the teacher goes on ahead, you get left way behind. Okay, another scenario might be this. Imagine you're learning a dance, and that dance involves neck and shoulder movement that you might not know how to do. While the instructor does those movements, you don't even see it because you're not used to thinking about how to move those muscles. You focus on just learning how to move your arms and legs, so you end up looking super stiff as you dance and wonder what is causing it. This might translate to learning Japanese in accents or saying the R sound in Japanese or intonation or things like this. These are all things that many other languages don't have. And as a result, you don't even know what it is that you're getting wrong. Anyways, these are just a few of the constraints that you might have, and there's far too many to explain them all here, but the one thing I want to leave you with is this. Something else might be holding you back outside of Japanese. So picture consciousness flowing from the top. Are you able to fully absorb every ounce of what you're learning, or is something holding you back? I realize this topic was a bit harder to understand, but I have a school community with 154 members where I walk people through stuff like this so that they can more easily identify what is holding them back and start actually improving in Japanese. For you guys in the group, if you have any questions about this, feel free to ask me anytime. I'd be happy to help you identify where your unidentified constraints might be. And I'll make a post where we can all discuss this as well. If you're not in the group, you can always post a comment here on YouTube, and I'll try to get back to everyone quickly. But I'd also love to hear if you're able to identify your constraint in your learning now. Is it focus? Is it motivation? Is it confusion? Try an experiment and think about what it could be that is holding you back. Write it down and post it in the comments here. And also let me know if you guys like this more abstract content or if you prefer more tactical and specific stuff. Was it too hard to understand, or did you like this kind of picture that I gave to you guys? Well, that's about all I have for this one. I'm about to go get some sushi or something like that. I'm pretty hungry. But stay chill, friends, and see you in the next one. Peace.